And often where it's amazingly obvious, but it's like the emperor wears no clothes, and people are so psychologically naive, they just take them at face value based on what they say. There was an example, a staggering example of that in a magazine called What is Enlightenment, called What is, and the issue was called What is Ego? I think you can actually read it free online now.
Mhm.
Ironically, the magazine is published by Andrew Cohen, himself a notorious egoist and abusive guru. But every author or sage or whatever that commented on the ego had something absolutely fascinating to say, except for a famous female guru that a lot of people revere, including even some people I know, named Amma, who's famous for giving, having a darshan where she gives, hundreds of people hugs and so forth. And people think of her like she's a god. In fact, I saw chalk graffiti that's on one of my oracle cards that, called "Giving Away Your Power" or something like that, and somebody wrote, "Alma is watching you," as if she were like an Old Testament omnipotent God watching everything. And so they ask Alma about ego, and first of all, she talks about herself in the third person, kind of like Madonna will say, like, "Well, Madonna, such and such." And every time I've run into somebody, Bob Dole, as an American politician, used to do this. But every time I've heard of somebody who refers to themselves in the third person, it's always for the same reason. They have such a persona, an actor's mask, that's become so divorced from who they really are that even they refer to themselves in the third person. So she's got this mask where she's calling herself Amma, and she's basically saying, well, the only way you can get rid of your ego, and of course, this is an absurd idea to get rid of your ego. There's no
Mhm.
self-reference without an ego. It's a completely necessary psychological structure. So when you hear people talking about getting rid of your ego, you're dealing with, people who are totally out of it.
Mhm.
And is by submitting to a guru. And then they ask her, well, who was your guru? And she said, oh, well, for me, the whole universe was my guru. So, in other words, everybody else has to submit to a guru, especially her, but she's on a permanently higher plane of this hierarchy she set up because only the universe is big enough to contain her ego, I guess. And so, here's somebody who, in just a few sentences, reveals a titanic ego that she's unaware of, and yet people will. And apparently, she's another one of those abusive gurus who acts like a total prima donna with her followers. We found out that Mother Teresa kind of acted in this kind of way with people who are close to her. And yet they're thought at a distance by all these people to be this revered figure. And it's not questioned, even though their outsized ego is raising red flags with almost every sentence that they speak. So you can have, when people deceive themselves, in general, their ability to be deceived by glamour systems, glamour figures, and so forth is basically infinite because they can use these control systems and these charismatic figures, um, in their own project of self-deception.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, the classic work on it is called The Denial of Death by Becker, I think his name is. He's an existential psychiatrist, I believe, and the book's very influential to a lot of people, even including Bill Clinton has mentioned it. I actually tried reading the book and found myself very disappointed. I thought the thinking was very reductive, but he makes an overall case that so much of what is in culture and like the heroic aspects that are big in Western culture are, a denial of death, and there is definitely quite a lot of truth in that if people, have a fear of death, and not everybody does, because there are people who've had near-death experiences, or people who've had, or in my case, it was a combination of out-of-body experiences and certain other mystical experiences, and you can have that fear of death that I had as a child totally turn around to
Mhm.
where it's hard not to want that amazing portal or event horizon to come closer.
Mhm.
But for many people, this is a real, who live in a materialist culture, as we do. Fear of death is one of the great lowest common denominator factors that can drive people in all kinds of ways. And you're right, it's not just about um, the you know the last moment of life. It is also the fear of corporeality, what I call the mortal corporeal version 1.0 body,
Hmm.
that is presenting you with many such death-related fears of like aging or of not being as good looking as somebody else and this type of thing. So people are incredibly driven to try and resist the death and the corporeality, the fragility, the limitations of their physical bodies, which indeed will die. And if you're a materialist, you think that this one leaky life raft is you and that this is all there is. And so it's the kind of thing that will motivate people to want to undergo the surgeon's knife in a desperate effort to hold on to youth and to do all kinds of untoward things, including, say, controlling, coercing, dominating some sexy young person so that you feel like you're still potent or you're still have high status and this kind of thing. Um, People who fear death look to, you know, create a little empire or a state for themselves here in life. They think by having as much money and as much power, the fear of death for the ego, for the person who thinks of death as a complete extinction event, then the compensatory desire is to have power over others because in death you feel you lose all power. So you may want to, it could turn you into a murderer because you want the helplessness that you fear to be the helplessness of a victim. And it can it can drive you toward all sorts of ruthless aims. And this kind of um, death-based philosophy comes across even in advertisements. So, for example, in the 1960s, there was a low-quality beer, I don't even know if it's still around, called Schlitz in
Hmm.
America. And there were TV ads that were just ubiquitous in the 1960s. I remember growing up watching them. And you would see, for example, in a typical Schlitz ad, you'd see like an older white guy in a yachtsman outfit, and he's on a yacht and he probably has a gold Rolex and he has like two blonde model types, on each arm and so forth. And of course, to show he's a great success, he has his can of Schlitz beer. And then the slogan or the voiceover for the ad was always the same. You only go around once in this life, so you've got to reach for all the gusto. Now, that's actually complete life philosophy there, and it's based on death. And it's based on the idea there's no reincarnation or survival of the soul. You only go around once. And what is the second half of that sentence? What should you do given that you're just going to die? Reach for all the gusto. Just be a greedy hedonist and grab for all the short-term pleasure and power that you possibly can. And so that is a operating system that drives many people who are in some of the high positions of power. And it just gives them this basic power drive and immoral desire to, he who dies with the most toys at the end wins and so forth. So it makes people go for short-term pleasure, power, prestige, and these types of things without any thought to like a soul or a greater spiritual arc of development.
Would you say